So, Amy, you're a mom, and
I
you,
am a mom.
yeah, that's pretty awesome. And you are married to Gabe the Great, Mexican, Colombian, American, and you have these Corexican, Colombian kids. And so, you know, what's it like to have all this kind of mashy, mixy culture, ethnicity in your house?
Well, to be honest, we didn't really think, well, obviously, we thought that we knew that there would be a great amount of mixing, but really, we thought it would be Korean, Colombian, and Mexican. Turns out it's actually not that simple, but we got super curious, and so we spit into these little tubes and sent them off to California and got our 23andMe's done.
Oh, that's awesome. So, can you tell me about the results of them? Like, was there anything surprising? So here you are, like, I'm Korean American. I have two Korean parents. What did you learn?
Well, it turns out that I am mostly Korean, which one would expect. Yeah, so I'm 60% Korean and I am 20% Japanese.
Whoa, what?
I know, 20% Japanese and then 14% Chinese. And then I got a little Mongol and some other stuff going on in there. But like I think the wildest thing in looking at those results is that culturally, I'm a Korean kid, Korean
Right.
American kid, as we have previously discussed. But, like being Korean means having strong feelings about, say, things like Japanese occupation of Korea
Hmm.
or Japanese Koreans in concentration camps under Japanese rule. Like my father grew up in North Korea and, um, you know, as a young child was in school during the occupation, so he had to learn like the Japanese national anthem. There is no part of me before getting these results that would have identified even a little bit as a Japanese person. So it's been a little confusing being like, okay, so what does this mean? Or does it mean anything? Because how do our genetics actually inform who we
Right.
are?
And like, what is Alejo now? Is he a little Japanese too?
Well, yeah, I think it turns out, so yes, my son is a little bit Japanese, and Gabriel did his 23andMe as well. And we found out some crazy stuff about him. So, we thought like most of it was unsurprising. The same way that I'm kind of 60% Korean, he was basically 60% Spaniard from the Iberian Peninsula. Not that surprising, right? But then there's also like 15% West African. I guess.
What?
I know, there's a slave trade.
Oh, there's that. Oh,
And then the
thanks.
Spaniards went across the ocean.
Okay,
And
cool.
then there was a lot of Native American. So he has a lot of Indio blood from the Mexican side of his family. And it turns out that the Chinese had a pretty big presence in South America also because he's also kind of Chinese.
What?
So, I know.
This is amazing. I mean, I think it's so interesting to think about identity and culture and ethnicity. So, which obviously I think it's interesting. This is what we we love to talk about. This is what this is all about. But I think this idea of who you understand yourself to be, how that shifts over time, being rooted in something culturally, and then finding out genetically that you have a totally different makeup than you thought or that then is reflected in your culture and identity, and that
Right.
that that may affect your health, right? Like, maybe being whatever percent Chinese he is, turns out he's more susceptible to certain illnesses that the Chinese community is more susceptible to, or whatever that is. It's just so, and how would he have known this before that? It's
Right.
so
And also
interesting.
the implications for our kids.
Right.
Who would have known that our son might be Japanese or
Right.
African or any of those things? Because you look at him and I don't think he looks that African,
He's not
I'll
super
say.
African. He looks more
No.
he looks more Corexican.
He does. He does. He does.
He looks very, yeah. I mean, I'm so interested in it. I think what we're going to talk about today is talk to somebody who works at 23andMe and find out a little bit more about what they are exploring and learning from the thousands and thousands of results they're getting. So, any more surprises from from you and Gabriel and your results that you could share with us?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the biggest was that, well, you know how I feel that I'm mostly Jewish.
Yes. Well,
Yeah,
that
obviously. Right.
happens in the
Right.
North Shore of Chicago.
Yes. So, I basically feel I am Jewish. And it turns out that my Spaniard, African, Native American husband is actually like 1.5% Ashkenazi Jew.
What? Welcome
I
to the
know.
tribe, Gabriel. That's the best.
I know. So, we have some work to do. We have some work
We
to do.
do have some work to do. I mean, on the other hand, my grandmother is 99% Ashkenazi Jew and 1% Neanderthal. So if we can find any Neanderthals to get on here, too, to talk about that, will be great. But I would love to talk to Gabe about his Jewishness and how he's exploring that. Could be Alejo going to Jewish school, maybe?
Well, maybe it's the challah. I mean, who knows? We'll
Yeah,
see.
we'll see. Okay, well, this is something to explore here. And yeah, I'm really excited. This is the Mashup Americans, a new podcast about culture and identity. I'm Rebecca Lehrer, and today my girl Amy Choi and I are looking deep into our genes, those things that we're told tell us who we are. And we got some surprising results. So we're going to talk to a population geneticist from 23andMe and get deep into the American genome. Let's do this. Okay, so actually, can you tell me what your full name is? Yeah, because I saw it written, but I didn't think I could pronounce it.
Yeah, so my full name is Katarzyna Britz.
Katarzyna?
Katarzyna.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
And it's
There's a lot of Z's in Polish.
Yeah, there really are. Okay, so Kasia Britz is a population geneticist at 23andMe. She's particularly interested in human anthropological genetics, which means she's thinking about incredible things like ancient human history and migrations, recent population admixture, aka mashiness, and other unknown forces shaping the human genome. So, Kasia, welcome to the Mashup Americans.
Thanks, and good to be here. And I'm glad that you've already made the connection between admixture and mashiness. We definitely love talking about admixture.
Yeah, it's funny because as I was reading and doing a little research, I kept coming upon the word admixture. And when I Googled it, I was like, oh, is admixture the geneticist term for mashup? So is it?
It totally is. So we use admixture to refer to when two populations that were previously separated mix. So that can refer to anything like Africans and Europeans mixing. It can refer to admixture with Neanderthals, so going back further back in time. So it's a great term, and we love talking about all sorts of things related to admixture, like when it happened, who was involved, things like that.
So we talk a lot about, we think all about identity and culture, which is why we took our 23andMe test and have a million questions for you. And one of the first ones I have, so for those of you who don't know, the test consists of spitting in a test tube and mailing that in. But I have a very important question. Do other people find spitting hard, the spitting part, and is having less spit genetic?
I don't know about the genetic. I do know it's quite a lot of spit to fill up that tube.
Yes.
It's a small tube, but it's a surprising amount of spit.
Yes.
So
my
yes,
husband it has a if we have children, he's definitely, I hope they get his spitting genes because he's able to produce a lot more spit than me.
Yeah, so it can be, it can take a while. So, people will try different tricks to try and, generate more spit. Maybe thinking about delicious food would help. I don't know. And so, yeah, I think a lot of times older individuals also have trouble just generating that amount of spit. It's a lot of spit.
All right, so spit doctors, call in and let us know later what we need to know about producing more spit for these things. So we're always digging into who we really are, like ultimately what identity you're becoming or choosing. So how do you as a geneticist think about identity?
Yeah, so identity is extremely complicated. 23andMe, we've done some research looking at how people self-identify versus what genetically their ancestry looks to be.
Right.
And it's really complicated.
Right, because I saw that, that this is how I understood it, that people with 28% or less African genes tend to identify as white or not as African. And I'm wondering, like, what that tipping point is, because 28% seems like a really high number to me, but I don't really know.
Yeah, in our paper, we looked at 23andMe customers who have consented to participate in research. And so we could see that people with a majority African ancestry, that they self-identify typically as African American and Black. But then if you conversely, people with sort of less than that 28% African ancestry, they tended to actually self-identify. More people tended to self-identify as European or white. And I think, there's been this long time understanding about individuals who carry bits of African DNA who then sort of quote unquote pass into the white community. And I think that it's probably got a lot to do with a lot of factors, including appearance and how you look, how your pigmentation genes look, what your hair color, your eye color, things like that.
Wow. Okay. I have so many follow-up questions. Okay. So one is, are there any genetic makeups that are uniquely American?
In the U.S., people have been living and coexisting for a long time, and what happens when people live together is they admix. That's the correct term,
right.
Polite term.
They mash up. Yeah.
So you can occasionally see, these traces of, African ancestry or Native American ancestry in individuals who, identify as European American.
Do you know, for the future, what might we expect to see reflected in U.S. genetics given kind of current immigration patterns? So since 2008, Asian immigrants have surpassed immigrants from Latin America. So is there something that we might expect, and like how long does it take generally to see that reflected?
Well, so, I think a lot of that has to do with things that are outside my, domain of expertise, like sociological factors, right? How much do people from these different groups mix, and how much do they intermarry, and how much do they mash up? And so, all of that.
Increasingly a lot. That's why we're here.
So I think certainly you would expect that as we go forward, the admixture is going to be definitely occurring more and more, but that's not to say that it hasn't been happening in the past. So if you look at Neanderthals, right? So this was this different group, and they were quite different, right? Morphologically, they were different, and yet, modern humans still managed to mash up with them on their way out of Africa. And there seems to be this story that every time we look at some ancient DNA and we sequence it and we say, oh, there's this interesting population, oh, it's already mashed up with modern humans. And so that, seems to be the way of humans to sort of admix. And it's a huge force in human history.
Speaking of Neanderthals, my 96-year-old grandmother, shout out to Omi, is 99% Ashkenazi Jewish and 1% Neanderthal. And so I read a little bit about this, but can you briefly explain how the Neanderthal piece plays in, or where that comes from?
Yeah, so the Neanderthals were sort of a human-like population that lived in Europe, and they hung out there starting, 400,000 years ago, something like that. So they became pretty differentiated genetically. And so the question for a long time was whether Neanderthals and modern humans sort of admixed. And by looking at what Neanderthal DNA looked like, we could see that modern humans seemed to carry traces of Neanderthal DNA, and in particular, not all modern humans, but those who were outside of Africa. So Europeans, East Asians, Oceanians seem to carry traces of Neanderthal DNA, and generally speaking, Africans less so.
Wait,
so we think
Lucy was not a Neanderthal? And now I'm saying Neanderthal now, not Neanderthal, because that's how you said it. So what are some of the most surprising things from the study or your most recent work? Something that surprised you?
So we know, okay, so let's do a little bit of background on your DNA. Okay, so most
Please.
people think of your genome, and in fact, the way that you inherit DNA, well, there's all sorts of different bits that we call, your DNA. And so there's, you have 23 pairs of chromosomes, right? That's what the 23 and 23andMe comes from. And 22 of those, numbered very innovatively 1 through 22, are what's called your autosomes. And so those are the ones that, you get one from mom and you get one from dad, and that's your pair. But then you also have your 23rd pair, which is your sex chromosomes. And so if you're a boy, you have one Y and one X, and if you're a girl, you have 2 X chromosomes. And so because of the asymmetrical way that the X chromosome is passed down, we can actually compare your ancestry on your X chromosome versus your autosomal ancestry to infer, which proportion of your ancestors were male or female from these different populations. And so when we looked at, European Americans, African Americans, and Latinos, we actually saw that there was what's called a sex bias in ancestry contributions. So in general, all of these groups had different levels of African, European, and Native American ancestry coming in through males and females. And in particular, you see more European male ancestry and more non-European female. So, for example, you have more African female ancestry.
Yes.
And so that's sort of been seen before in populations like Latinos and a little bit in African Americans, that you have in Latinos, you have more Native American female, more European male. Again, it's who's there, right? But then also...
And probably something to do with power dynamics.
And probably something else. Again, very complex.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But what's surprising is you see the same in European Americans, which we didn't really expect to see. So if you look at European Americans who carry bits of Native American or African DNA, you see that most of that comes in through the female sex bias with more European male contributions. So that was a little bit surprising.
Wow, that's incredible. What's the most mashy thing?
So all of it is mashy. I think, I mean, we certainly were surprised at the levels of European Americans, people who self-identify as European American or white, who carry non-European ancestry. So either African or Native American ancestry, and just the proportion of individuals. So something like 10% of people who live in the South are carrying, European Americans are carrying African ancestry. And that's not something that I think, it's been anecdotally seen, but it's not something that had been systematically characterized. The fact that, everyone is mashy.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's not huge amounts of African ancestry. A lot of it tends to be in the sort of 1% to 2% range of African ancestry. But still, I mean, that reflects, your ancestors, right? If you carry 1% to 2%, that's something like having an African ancestor, something like 10 generations back, right? So
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's awesome. We should tell some people who are holding political debates that, so that they keep us less separate. So I have, so actually my brother Rafi wanted to know. He and my dad have the same selfie face, meaning they make the same face in selfies, and he wants to know if that's genetic.
I think we need to study that at 23andMe.
Absolutely. You could probably do some facial recognition software, and please get back to us on that. What is the most common question geneticists get asked?
Oh, wow.
Or that you get
most
asked?
Common question. I have 0.1% African ancestry. What does that mean? If someone has 0.1% ancestry, it's not necessarily convincing solid evidence that they truly have that ancestry. It might just be picking up on some, shared common ancestor that, most similarly matches right now to something in Africa, but it's sort of hard to say. And so that's sort of the first question. And then the second question is, well, how many generations ago does that translate to?
Right.
And so there's this rule of thumb. So, each of your parents gave you half your DNA, and each of your grandparents on average gave you about a quarter, right? And if you keep going back, you can sort of extrapolate out. But unfortunately, it's not actually true that you get one quarter, one quarter, one quarter from each grandparent. You can actually be differently related to each grandparent. So it's on
Right,
average
yeah.
a quarter.
Amy
But
did.
there's a lot
Amy
of
and her
variation.
totally. Amy and her sister Sandy did their 23andMe test, and they had totally different results.
Yeah, so totally different is
Well,
less common, but you
Not
can
totally
certainly
different. I mean, they were still some combination of Japanese, Chinese, Korean, and other Asian, but
yeah. So certainly I was expecting that my brother and I are so different that I thought we would be, 0% sharing identical DNA. But it turns out that we are just like the average siblings, about 50% related. But it's true that you can actually, inherit different bits of DNA than from your parents than, for example, your brother did. And likewise, as you go further back in time, you might inherit more or less DNA from a particular genealogical ancestor just because it's a random process where the genes get shuffled up and then passed down. And so as a result, when we look at a little bit of DNA and we ask, okay, how many generations ago, might this African ancestor or Native American ancestor have come in? It could be, as recent as, 5 generations. It could be as distant as 20 generations. It can be very hard to tell. So it's a hard question to answer, but it's always interesting, and certainly I encourage people to try and dig in to their genealogies and figure out who that might have been.
so clearly you've taken your results. Were you surprised by them at all, or did it change how you identify culturally or ethnically?
So I was a little bit surprised actually. So, I so I'm Polish, and by that I mean I'm from the same small town in Poland that my, grandparents and great grandparents are from. And so I was, quite surprised when I had a little bit of Balkan ancestry appear in my DNA. And so I went to my parents and I said, "Hey, what's with this? I'm, mostly Eastern European, and then I've got this little tiny bit of Balkan." And my mom's like, "Oh, well, didn't you know your great great grandfather? He wasn't from Poland?" And so I didn't know that, in fact.
Yeah. You guys forgot to tell me.
Exactly. So I love the power of getting access to your DNA results. It's both super interesting, but it also can open up conversations that you've haven't had with your parents, with your relatives, and actually get like the history from open up the discussion, right? And so, yeah, as a result, I went and I talked to my grandfather about this, and yeah.
That's so awesome. This is so great. Thank you so much for your time. It was really great to
Yeah.
talk to you.
Pleasure to be here.
Kasha Britz is a population geneticist at 23andMe, and she's a Mashup American. The Mashup Americans are me, Rebecca Lehrer.
And me, Amy Choi.
Our show is part of the Infinite Guest network of awesome podcasts,
Like the Dinner Party Download and Secret Skin with Open Mike Eagle.
and produced with Southern California Public Radio, KPCC.
Our show is also supported in part by an award from the National Endowment for the Arts on the web at arts.gov.
See you next time.
Adios.